Welcome to November's Strategy Cafe. Really pleased to have new subscribers this month. For those of you who are new, Cafe is our monthly leadership magazine, and we kind of pick out interesting topics on leadership, and we like to take leaders from all sorts of different spectrums and look at leadership from many angles. And our hope is you find it useful and inspirational in your own leadership challenges. So our purpose is to help you as a leader to lead better, and that's a mix of getting your strategy right and then supporting you with the delivery of that. And that's, I guess, a bit of our unique approach to life. And one way of doing that is to help you understand leadership and growth options. And the cafe is a nice way to connect with you all and share our thinking. Really pleased to hear your suggestions for subjects, for improvements, and for people that you'd like us to interview. So if there's anyone out there you think would be great and you want to hear from them, yeah, just let us know. Don't forget you can post questions during the webinar this morning, and we can pick these up and pass them to Hilary during the session. So please put your questions up in the questions area. I think Hilary's camera has disappeared. Hopefully that'll come back, but you can see me. Just a little bit about forthcoming events. So the next one, really delighted to have CEO of the Equality and Human Rights Commission coming up in December's cafe. Rebecca is very interesting as a leader. And the Commission at the moment is tackling gender pay gap and sort of part of the Me Too movement, the sort of sexual harassment issues at work. So that's kind of like good context, and we're going to be talking to her about leadership, sort of social leadership, you know, taking legal action and campaigning for improvements in equality in the UK. Really interesting. So after today's webinar, you should be able to register and come on board in December to listen to me interview Rebecca. Welcome, Hilary.
Good morning, Nick.
So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, you can see a picture of me on the slide. As you say, I've lost the camera because it said there was a low signal. So maybe if somebody wants to come around and do some magic, that would be helpful. But I can talk anyhow. So you can see from the slide that I was the president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants until just over a year ago. And so in doing that role, that was an amazing opportunity. But it did put me on one side from doing what I was doing before, which was doing some teaching and some research. So I put those activities to one side while I was involved being the president. And I've now had the opportunity to come back and do more work in that space.
What was it like to be president?
Oh, it was absolutely amazing. I mean, you're leading an organisation of 150,000 people.
Wow.
You were elected by a council of 90, so they're deciding you're the person that they want to lead them. And yeah, for me, the most important thing about being a leader is to make sure that people are following you. So an awful lot of what I was doing as the leader was meeting members, hearing what their concerns were. And then the Institute was developing its new strategy. So very much trying to move the strategy forward to make it fit for the next 10 years or so.
And can you give us this? I mean, that's quite a really interesting time to arrive as president when they're going through the strategy review. So, you know, what were sort of the key themes?
Well, the key themes we decided was that we were overall wanting to be a world of strong economies and help build that. That was what the Institute's main focus was. And that was around the individuals doing it. It was around the Institute making sure it was offering the qualification around the globe. And it was around doing an awful lot of capacity building work to help develop the profession globally. So those are the themes around that.
Really interesting, and I think that you know, kind of your arrival also chimed with your prior work on professional learning. So maybe just give us a bit of an insight into that, which kind of feeds into this background that we can see on your slide here.
So the the background around the research is that I was trying to work out what should learning look like for chartered accountants in the future. It was very much around the fact that everybody, all professions, are facing enormous change. It was around the fact that increasing regulation for people, increasing globalization, whoever the professional is, it was very much the challenges that they were facing. And when I started my research, it was about 6 years ago, and Brexit wasn't even thought of then, and the impact of AI wasn't thought of. But even by then, there was a big area of change, a big storm of change building up. So that was one of my dynamics for doing my research. The next dynamic was around the fact that the shape of careers are changing. So members, individuals are having longer careers, they're having more gaps in their careers, they're changing career more often. And so you're looking at all those changes and you're working out what should the learning be like to help people survive and thrive. And that was all very well me wanting to do that. Then the external driver, if you like, was that the global body for accountants said, let's set up a requirement that all professional accountancy bodies need to make sure they've got compulsory CPD schemes, continuing professional development schemes for their members. And so in doing that, they then wanted all the bodies to put in schemes and to foster a commitment to lifelong learning. So I thought, do you know what? This is a very vague phrase. What does lifelong learning mean? And how can our members survive and thrive in this context that they're in? So that was the background to the research.
I think it's cool. It's really challenging. I think when we were chatting about this, I was talking about my experience in professional life, and I kind of know what you mean, because in a big professional firm, you get a real mix of attitudes about professional development, continuing professional development, from those people who just see it as a chore. And firms sort of similarly pay short shrift to it sometimes. All the way to the other end of the spectrum, where you'll have some professionals who see it as an exciting way of helping clients and bringing in business to the firm, and go with a sort of a zest and a hunger for what's coming up. And then in the middle is I would say sort of a population of the fearful, who are worried about getting things wrong, and their main reason for being there is make sure they don't get anything wrong, which is a big driver. So it is a real mix. And I was quite interested in what you're saying about the storm of change sort of kicking off around the time you started to do this research. It definitely feels like that, doesn't it? It feels like there is so much change, and there's a lot of talk about accountants becoming, or professionals of any sort becoming irrelevant, about the machines taking over lots of the white collar work. And so it's a huge sort of social shift going on for professionals, and this point about staying relevant, I think, is really significant.
And the trouble is that the letters CPD have been captured as an adjective, if you like, to describe courses, and so it's something that you have to do. You have to tick a box about it.
Yes.
And so that's the shame, and so the excitement of learning is lost, and it's about have you done enough of what you were supposed to be doing?
Yes, rather than knowledge is exciting and powerful as an expert and useful. So there's something of the passion in the knowledge, I would think, for if you're in the right space. So, I mean, I think that nicely feeds into this slide. Maybe just talk us through this. I think this is your discovery. How did you come to this idea, and talk us through how this works?
Well, it's a deceptively simple slide. I can't believe it took me 3.5 years to work it out. But when you're doing research, you have to find out a framework that you fitting your research around. And I was trying to find out what people had been saying about learning. And very much there'd been a school of thought that learning was about knowledge and skills and attitude. And so the triangle other researchers had the triangle with that line across the top rather than down the side. And I was struggling with how this all fitted together. And then as soon as I moved the whole thing through 60 degrees, I could see how it would make sense. And so the 3 dimensions of learning that people were talking about, so your knowledge and skills, your attitude and your behavior, those are very much the 3 aspects that if you make sure your learning is encompassing all of those, you'll do really well. But having turned it round, you could then see the trajectory in that people at the top were very much, or the top area is very much around doing CPD, the knowledge, having the knowledge and skills that you need. Whereas as you move down, you're looking far more at how you need to learn in different ways. So you can describe the knowledge and skills at the top as learning as acquisition. And you can describe the attitude area as learning as becoming, because it's how you're changing, and the behavior one as learning as participation. And so you can see how as we move forward into the 21st century, we need very much to be making sure we're learning in all those ways by participating and becoming as well. The acquisition will never go away. We'll always need the knowledge and skills, but it's those other bits that we need to add in. And the doing CPD was a phrase that came up early in the research, but the lower areas, the changing yourself and changing your world, were phrases that came out of me reading a quote from Aldous Huxley only last year. He was saying that you can't hope to change the world, you can only hope to change yourself. And my thinking is that if you have a go at changing yourself, then you might be able to have a go at changing the world around you. So the bottom, the top part's very much about CPD. The bottom part is about the other learning that you need to be refreshing and renewing yourself.
Yeah. So folks, if you're listening in, you've got questions, there's a poll area, or a questions area, just go in there and type the question in. I can see Susie's online this morning and could put a hand up. So if you've got a question to ask Hilary, we'll field them towards the end. Just put your questions into the question area. I love Aldous Huxley. He's a really interesting person to read, and we always say so. I mean, Olympics obviously a change practice, but one of our principles is exactly the same, Hilary. It's first person to think about changing is changing yourself, because the people that you're with, the people that you're influencing, will be influenced by that. So that is how you can't control how other people make their own minds up and how they decide to change, but you can control your own change, and it will influence. So as you say, it gives you a chance to change the world, and in this space, the knowledge and skill space, I think that's really powerful.
And the only other point I'd add is that the danger is that you do your CPD and then you try to change the world, and you won't do that unless you also change yourself.
Yes.
So it's there's a temptation to think, oh, I'll leave out that bit. You know, I can just go on as I am, but you've actually got to integrate it so that it's a complete process. Yeah.
So let's move on to this. So I think this is a really maybe a slightly more complicated set of pyramids, but just talk us through, because I think it all makes sense. Just maybe just walk us through this, Hilary, and we can maybe put the dots together.
So these are the same 3 dimensions. And after I'd got my doctorate and I was playing around with this, I thought, well, actually, I've got a theoretical model. How can I describe it to other people? And so very much what this does is it divides it up into 9 different areas. And it's very much around the starting at the top with the courses and the technical updates. That's very much around doing your CPD, if you like. And very much around the whole question of being an informed professional. That's the phrase that I came up with. Whereas when you add the next stage down, with the second layer in as well, you're then bringing in all the learning at work. So this is what being a professional is all about. It's about learning on the job. It's about learning from other people. It's about learning through reflection. And so for me, the top 2 layers, I then think that's the competent professional. So that's the person that's very safe to send out to the clients, and also somebody that the regulator would be very happy to approve to carry out work in a defined space. But then the bottom bit brings in an idea that I was describing as career adaptability. And that's where you're just bringing in this whole continuous change process into what you're doing, so that you can then be what I call the complete professional.
Right.
So that's somebody that's absolutely competent, but also continually refreshing their skills. And so you can see with this framework, I was very much thinking it was linear to begin with, and thinking I got the top layer, the middle layer, the bottom layer, but actually play around with it in all sorts of ways. So you can take away the 4 on the right-hand side triangle with learning through reflection at the top, and that's all about changing yourself. You can take the chunk that's headed up with learning with and from others, and that's all about trying to change the world that you're involved in. So you can actually play around with this. And the idea is that, I mean, doing anything like going on a course, it's not just about knowledge and skills, because you meet people. But if you make sure that your learning encapsulates all 9 areas of the model, then what you find is that you're learning in as many different ways as possible. And if I've got time for just a quick example, after I graduated, I wrote to the sort of CPD research guru who'd I talked to before I started my research, and I thought, well, I'm supposed to be experimenting and exploring, so I sent in the thesis and said, here you are. And that's not my natural instincts to just sort of share things like that. I was living the model because I developed it. And he wrote back and said, can we meet for a coffee, and would you like to write a book? So that's just an immediate example of being proactive, changing what you're doing, and it'll change the future for you. And actually behind each of these, I've now got sort of 6 mini questions that you can ask yourself. Make sure that your learning is being as holistic as possible.
I should go back to this one. Go on, carry on with the questions.
No, I mean, it's just the fact that there is a toolkit. Because all the time you're a researcher and you're finding out this theoretical stuff, and then you're working out, well, if I actually want to make a difference myself with this, I've got to make it so it's what all the professionals out there want, what they'll find useful. So that's the thing. You do research, you find something out, and then if you're not going to be the one that takes it forward and does more with it, then it's just going to disappear. So this is why I'm trying to spread the word about the framework.
So I mean, we're interviewing Dr. Hilary Lindsay this morning on her research and time as president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and also on the work she's been doing to encourage professionals to see their lifelong learning in that sort of more holistic sense, and just looking at her model. Got some great questions come through for you. I did click onto this slide about the default buttons, and these apply to accountants, but I get they apply to many professionals. Just talk us through this.
Well, as accountants, we're trained to be all these things down the left-hand list. I mean, or they're really important, particularly early on in our careers. Before we're completely in charge of our own destinies, other people will be giving us deadlines and chargeable hour targets and so on. So we become very left brain orientated. And the really difficult thing is to actually realize that I need to sort of say to the left brain, go away and have a coffee, and let's have a little break, and let's do some of the positive stuff. So the points on the right-hand side, which is the bottom part of the framework, are things that when I've talked to accountants, or when I've been on courses where we've used my framework on the CARBA wellbeing courses, when I talk to them about it, they've just never thought that that was something they ought to be doing. So it's just trying to get people to realize, to help themselves, they need to be good enough at each of these 5 areas on the right.
I think it's really great insight, and I think if you start to encourage people to think about how they can experience it in this way. So part of this, I think, is about attitude, isn't it? So you've got their positive attitude and self-belief, the willingness to explore, the willingness to experiment, the willingness to engage. if your self attitude starts with this is just points for my annual qualification update, then your mind in a way is not open to those things. But if you encourage people to think about how they can, where in their life they have positive attitude and self-belief, where they experiment, and to explore their CPD in that way, I think they only have to experience it a little to really feel it, to sense it, and then it'll take off for them.
Yeah, I think you're quite right, and it's just that mindset that helps you all the time. Everything you're doing is a learning opportunity.
So it's really, you're taking us back into the concept of growth mindset. I put this one up, which is one of our sort of slides on thinking about things that happen to you that make you who you are, and thinking ahead about how you're going to change your attitude to things and plan ahead. So this is around life purpose, but I guess the basic point is that what you're saying is that for professionals, my learning really is got to be related to my life purpose.
Yes, it has, but it's also, looking at this slide, which I looked at with interest, is that each time any of these things happens, like you've got a job or you've got a better job, or you've lost a job, actually they're all opportunities to look through the framework and think about what learning do I need to be doing at this point in time. Yeah. And your long-term purpose may not be that clearly defined. But the really important thing for me is that if you're a member of a professional body and you're wanting to go on trying to make a difference to society for as long as possible, then it's about trying to make sure that any decisions you make now take into account where you want to be in the future. And so when I've talked to our members, the ones that have been able to, even if they have career breaks, have been able to stay on the fringes of the profession in some way and keep connected to the professional role in some way, they're the ones that can then pick up their career later on. And so it's about thinking short-term, medium-term and long-term, and having the purpose at the end. But the purpose will keep changing. So, but it's what the framework does do is it makes sure that your attitude and your behaviour fit together, and you're trying to be one person.
Yes. And I guess thinking of your learning in its broadest aspect, so that you're creating that resource in yourself to respond. We heard from Aldous Huxley earlier on. Maybe just throw in Lennon as well, who said, I think it was Lennon, life's what happens while you're busy making other plans. Sometimes in life things come at you. You can have periods where you're, as a professional, just sort of doing the same thing, and CPD can become more of a routine in your mind, but actually that's a time to build, because life will always throw a curveball at you at some point, which I think is also what this, it's kind of what you're saying.
Yes.
Things will happen.
Opportunity, being aware of what's happening. Yeah.
Are you okay to take a few questions?
Yes, of course.
So Vicky's online, Vicky Bradley, and Vicky, I think, is she's trained in many different professional aspects, including law. So Vicky's asking, have you come across the science of character, the sort of the movement around that, which is more about traits, and showing that character traits are as important, for example, as science or as maths on our teaching. She's sort of asking that in the light of what you were saying. What do you think about that? About the idea of character traits being important?
I don't know that area particularly well, but I think that what the framework can do is make you more rounded, if you like, or make you aware of things that you might be avoiding doing because of your the way you are. So you might be instinctively more introvert. And so when you have a framework that says you're supposed to do a bit of experimenting and exploring, you might think, oh my goodness, that doesn't suit me at all. Yeah. But in a way, you're being given permission to do it. So I think that's where it fits in.
Yeah. Interesting sort of add-on to that from Katerina, who's online. Katerina Gould, who's listening, is fantastic coach. Morning, Katerina. She says she encourages her clients to experiment and to think about risk taking. She's just wondering for you, given your kind of research with accountants who are generally trained to reduce risk or minimize risk, how do they respond to the idea of risk of experimenting?
Well, you need both, don't you? You need to be aware of risks, but then having found out a particular risk, you then need to work out, how can I mitigate it? How can I work around it? And the mitigation doesn't just want to be around protecting things. Mitigation might be about being more proactive. So if we look at Brexit at the moment, nobody knows what's going to happen, and I don't want to get into it in any detail at all, but lots of businesses are actually choosing to do extra things they wouldn't normally do because they can't wait to see what happens. They actually need to be getting ready now. And it's that sort of anticipation that's a key part. And some of them like to experiment a lot. Some accountants don't like to experiment a lot. And I'm not saying that by experimenting you should be reckless in any sense. But it's just about, is there a better way or a different way, or what are other people doing that I might do instead? It's that sort of mindset.
I think that's one of the great benefits of being in a firm is that. I mean, that's one thing that in my experience was always really enjoyable, was actually being. So, for example, if we went to a CPD session, one of the things that was really great about that was actually being together with senior colleagues who had experience and talking about some of the learning and how we might apply it. Because the ideas of other professionals were, good clues as to how to experiment in your own practice with clients, and very interesting. And I think the other way of looking at it, I would say, is things like tough love. Sometimes you have to take a risk to be honest with somebody, and I think in law or in accountancy in particular, that's almost a requirement with clients, is that you have to risk honesty all the time when many others are hiding from it, either because they're fearful of what might have happened, or there's a mistake happened, and the job of the auditor, if you like, is to reveal what's hidden. So that does require the risk of honesty, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and it's back to this critical friend idea. I'm not saying I'm not commenting on friendliness of auditors, but I'm talking about the fact there are always two aspects. And the other interesting thing with the experimenting, Nick, is that when somebody new joins your organisation from a different organisation, they seem to have all sorts of bright ideas. Well, actually, they've just been somewhere else.
Exactly.
And so this is one of the obvious ways of bringing in new ideas, is by talking to other people and finding out how they do things.
So we're talking about the idea of experimenting and curious about how people in professional life will respond to that. But actually, when you dig into it, it is just at the root, and it's the root of professionalism, isn't it, to experiment with new ideas, while staying within the realm of honesty and best practice. And that's kind of one of the challenges, I think. But really interesting. Bryony,
talk about developing professional practice, don't we? That word developing means that you're moving forward.
I think it's really hard, isn't it? Some of the questions in that conversation about how do you influence a client where your connection is professional, but you want them to change. Going back to your very first slide, how do I influence others? And again, that's at the heart of professional leadership, is leading clients in the right direction, and can be very tough to do. So a critical friend.
I think it's about the attitude bit, the changing yourself bit.
Yes.
And it's very much about being authentic.
Yes.
So that people know who you are and what you stand for, and that's always going to be there, whatever you've got to say. So sometimes it's good news, sometimes it'll be bad news, but people will know that you're coming from a particular perspective.
Just turn my lights back on here. So I think that's fascinating stuff, and sort of really digs into the heart of the challenge of professional leadership, this sort of strangely ambiguous space of leading clients in the right direction and needing to be honest, and the challenge of working out, and it does take you back into what Vicky was saying about character traits, because there's some really interesting stuff about how if you have great rapport with your clients, it's much easier to influence them. Whereas if you have a sort of a stonewalling kind of relationship, a cold relationship, they're less likely to connect, and therefore they're less likely to listen. So it does bring you down to the bottom half of your triangle, I think, in
And
the
it,
human
it
aspects.
comes down to the engaging part and about the developing an honest relationship, so you understand their position and they understand your position.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Yes, great points. And Bryony was asking about who should take responsibility for this, I guess. So, professional firms out there who are training their intake, should, in terms of influencing this approach, which is, I think, really strongly backed by your research, and people can go and have a look at that if they're interested. But who should be really taking responsibility for taking professionals down this route in terms of their lifelong learning? Is it the employer's responsibility, or is it ours as professionals? Where does it lie?
that's a really, really interesting question, and it's one that's been teasing CPD researchers for decades. Just who does CPD benefit? Who's it for?
Yeah.
And I think the top part of the model, the competent professional, is very much absolutely in the interests of the employer.
Yes.
It also is in the interests of the employee, but the employer is going to make sure that they've got fit and proper people that they're sending out to do their particular tasks that they need to do. The bottom bit, and me being selfish, that's me. This is how do I develop me? How do I develop the Hilary Lindsay brand? It's about doing the bottom part. So I think individuals can all look at the bottom part for themselves. But if the organisation also brings in the bottom part, then they will find that their employers are being able to add extra to what they're doing. And that's really the point. They'll be bringing that extra proactivity to what they're doing, questioning, challenging, improving things. So I think it's a mixture, really. And the other thing with this, of course, is that this is a framework that, as with all frameworks, individuals can look at this, but also teams can look at this.
Right.
So a team within an organisation could actually look at all these areas and say, well, how well are we learning in all these spaces, or what more could we be doing, or what would make us more effective? So it's a real mishmash.
I love it. I think it's a really lovely framework, and I'm really pleased that you've been so generous to come on the cafe this morning and share this with us. I think it's a fantastic piece of leadership in terms of encouraging education for anyone who's got a desire or drive to improve their both their hard skills and their soft skills to make a difference in their lives and in the lives of their customers and their team. I think it's a really wonderful model, and there's loads of sort of learning from this. So really, really cool. Certainly resonates with me, and I'm sure it does with everybody else out there. So some great questions from everybody, and a nice comment from Vicky just at the end. She's sort of picking up on the quote, change is learning, which she says summarizes this discussion. I agree, and I really like that. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your questions. So just a quick summary, and then we wrap up for the day. Professional knowledge is about application. How do you apply it? How do you influence your clients, the world around you in your context? So whether that's engineering, architecture, the law, accountancy, other professions, medical, the context is shifting so quickly that it can become demotivating to, as you get through your career, and I've certainly seen many people become demotivated by the amount of new learning that they're constantly sort of bombarded with. But the context is shifting, so that learning can never stop. And the key to this, getting that motivation, is about relating the learning back to our life and our purpose, and then that becomes really, really key. And will pull you back into doing the hard work and keeping it going. And then that drives motivation. So that's a question about how we routinely weave our personal growth into our work. And I really like the idea of layering it. So learning on the job, learning with clients, learning through a project, learning for real. There's a sort of a tic-tac, if you like, in my mind, between the textbook and the technical learning and what I'm trying to do right now. And I think the world is moving us in that direction. So just as a very simple example, I can always watch a YouTube clip on how to tie my bow tie just before I go out. I've got the need to go out and I want to look smart, and I can just access a little bit of technical learning to get that bow tie right. I can never remember it. I ought to have got it by now, but it's just a really simple example. And then that brings you back into maintaining standards and the recognitions, which is so key to our brand as professionals, if you like, that we have those badges of achievement. So ultimately, we're saying attitude and behaviour drive growth in both expertise, and then ultimately, I think what Lindsay is saying is, Hilary is saying is that there's a wisdom point there, which is about life and who you are. So I hope you enjoyed it. As usual, big question to you is there one thing from today's session from Dr. Lindsay that you're going to do? You know, you can have the slides, they'll be up online, you can go back and review them. Thinking about your own self-development, your own connection with your learning in your life, you know, what's the one thing you're going to do? Love to hear from you if anyone wants to send any sort of comments in. And then just a reminder, we talked about this up at the top of the cafe. So next one will be our last one for 2018. And we're absolutely privileged to have the CEO of the Equality and Human Rights Commission on the 13th of December at 8:30. And they're currently looking at identity issues, sexual harassment, the Me Too movement, gender pay gap. And so our conversation is going to be about, it's really going to be about authenticity and identity. Rebecca is just absolutely fascinating. And this session is, again, leadership in a different space. So this is about influencing society and influencing equality and influencing access. And you know, the institutions that we have in the UK that do that, and the people that man those institutions that sort of lead there and try and make things better. So absolutely fascinating, and really looking forward to talking to Rebecca. And then just a final note, 23rd of January is our next London Leaders Forum. We had a fantastic session this month. And the next one is going to be about helping people with change. I think that kind of feeds in really beautifully to what Hilary's been talking us through today. And she's been kind enough to agree to come along and speak at our next forum. So if you want to come along and hear her, you'll be able to register on our website shortly. And just a reminder that 10% of ticket sales for Leaders Forum goes to our chosen charity, Place to Be. Just forgot to mention as well the summer. So it's a long way out, but we're getting ready for it now. So this is all leading into a big conference around meaningful human leadership and new models of business for people in leadership in a changed world, which is going to be on the 12th of June. So hopefully it'll be nice and hot again. And we'll be through all of the politics, I can dream. So thank you for listening. Thank you everyone for coming on this morning. I hope you've enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you all next time round.